I'm Major Lori Dixon, 34 years old, and I built my career in the Army from the ground up. For years, I carried the weight at home, supporting my family, helping my sister through school, holding things together while chasing my own path in service. But one night at dinner, her husband looked at my uniform, laughed, and said I'd never be anything. That was the moment I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been underestimated, mocked, or dismissed by someone who thought they knew your worth? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being written off, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and proving people wrong. What happened next might surprise you. The first time my sister brought her husband around, I noticed his tone. It wasn't obvious at first, just something in the way he carried himself, like he was sizing everyone up. We were at Mom and Dad's house for Sunday dinner. The usual crowd gathered around the kitchen island while Mom pulled a roast from the oven. Sarah introduced him as Marcus, and he shook hands with everyone. Firm grip, eye contact, all the right moves. But when he got to me, there was this pause. A flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "So you're the military one," he said, not really a question. I was in civilian clothes, jeans and a sweater, nothing that screamed service member. Sarah must have mentioned it. "Army," I said, keeping it simple. He nodded, but there was this slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. "That's cool. What do you do exactly?" Before I could answer, Dad jumped in with some story about his old Navy days, and the moment passed. But I caught Marcus watching me during dinner, the way you might watch something mildly entertaining on TV. When I mentioned I had to report for training the next morning, he made this sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "Early bird gets the worm, right?" he said, cutting into his mashed potatoes. "Must be nice having someone tell you exactly what to do every day." Sarah laughed. "Marcus, don't be mean." "I'm not being mean. I'm just saying, some people need that structure." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Nothing wrong with following orders. The conversation moved on to other things: Sarah's job at the marketing firm, Mom's book club, Dad's golf game. Normal family stuff. But I noticed how Marcus positioned himself in every discussion, always finding a way to be the expert. When Dad mentioned trouble with his computer, Marcus launched into this explanation about operating systems. When Mom brought up her struggles with her garden, he had opinions about soil composition. And whenever I spoke, even about something completely unrelated to the military, he had this expression. Like he was humoring a child. After dinner, while Mom and Sarah cleared dishes, Marcus and I ended up on the back deck with Dad. The conversation turned to careers, as it always did. Dad asked about my recent assignment, and I mentioned the leadership course I'd completed. "Leadership course?" Marcus laughed outright this time. "What do they teach you? How to say yes, sir, with enthusiasm?" Dad looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, no, I'm genuinely curious. I mean, in the real world, leadership is about innovation, taking risks, thinking outside the box. But in the military..." He shrugged. "It's all about conformity, right? Following the chain of command." I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "It's more complex than that." "Is it, though?" He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "I'm not trying to be difficult here. I just think there's a difference between real leadership and military leadership. One requires independent thinking, the other requires..." He gestured vaguely. "Well, you know." Inside the house, I could hear Sarah and Mom talking about wedding plans. They were engaged now, though no date had been set. Sarah seemed happy, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her last relationship had ended badly, a guy who'd cheated on her with her roommate. She'd been cautious about dating after that, so when she started talking about Marcus, I was glad. He made her laugh. He brought her flowers. He remembered her birthday. But sitting there on the deck, watching him dismiss everything I'd worked for with that casual arrogance, I wondered if Sarah saw this side of him. The way he had to win every conversation, had to establish himself as the authority on everything. Maybe she did see it. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe she thought it was confidence. "You know what I think?" Marcus continued, warming to his theme. I think the military attracts a certain type of person. People who are more comfortable being told what to do than figuring it out for themselves. There's nothing wrong with that, society needs followers. But let's call it what it is. Dad cleared his throat. I think you might be oversimplifying, am I? Marcus turned to me. What do you think? Do you consider yourself a leader, or are you more of a follower? The question hung in the air between us. Through the kitchen window, I could see Sarah loading the dishwasher, completely absorbed in her task. She was humming something, probably the song she'd had stuck in her head all week. She looked content. Happy. This was the man she was planning to marry, the one who made her feel secure after everything she'd been through. I think I said carefully that real leadership comes in many forms. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Diplomatic answer. Very military of you. That was 3 months ago. Since then, there had been other dinners, other gatherings, other small moments where Marcus found ways to make his point. Always subtle, always delivered with that same easy confidence. Sarah either didn't notice or chose not to see it. And I started to understand that this wasn't really about the military at all. This was about Marcus needing to establish a hierarchy, needing to make sure everyone understood where they stood in relation to him. He worked in finance, something involving hedge funds and investment portfolios. He made good money, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits. He was the kind of person who dropped names casually in conversation, who always seemed to know someone who knew someone. Sarah was impressed by all of it, by his success and his confidence and his ability to navigate a world she found intimidating. But I saw how he looked at me during family gatherings. Like I was a problem he couldn't quite solve. Here was this person who'd chosen a different path entirely, who couldn't be impressed by his salary or his connections or his insider knowledge of financial markets. And worse, I had the audacity to seem perfectly fine with my choice. So he kept testing, kept pushing, kept looking for the crack where he could insert his particular brand of superiority. Each comment was small enough to be dismissed as a joke, subtle enough that calling it out would make me seem oversensitive. But they added up, created a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The irony was that I actually respected what he did professionally. Finance was complicated, demanding, required real intelligence and skill. But Marcus couldn't extend that same respect in return. My career had to be diminished for his to matter. My choices had to be wrong for his to be right. And maybe that should have made me angry. Maybe I should have confronted him, should have demanded that Sarah see what was happening. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of having to justify myself, tired of watching him perform his superiority, tired of pretending everything was fine for the sake of family harmony. I loved my sister. I wanted her to be happy. And if Marcus made her happy, then I would find a way to live with his condescension. But I didn't have to like it. One night at dinner, it shifted. I'd come straight from base, hadn't had time to change, so I showed up in my dress uniform. It was nothing unusual. Sometimes the timing just worked out that way, and my family was used to seeing me in military attire. But the moment I walked through the door, I could feel the change in atmosphere. Marcus was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter with a beer, talking to Dad about some investment opportunity. He looked up when I came in, and his expression shifted. Not surprise, exactly, but something sharper. More focused. Well, he said, setting down his beer. Look what the cat dragged in. Sarah was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like her famous marinara sauce. Don't be rude, she said without turning around. She probably had a long day. I'm not being rude. I'm just saying, he gestured at my uniform. It's very official. Mom emerged from the pantry with a bottle of wine. You look lovely, sweetheart. How was your day? Fine, I said, hanging my cap on the coat rack. Sorry I'm late. The briefing ran long. Briefing, Marcus repeated, like the word amused him. That sounds important. There was something different in his voice tonight. Less subtle, more direct. I glanced at Sarah, but she was focused on her cooking, seemingly oblivious to the shift in tone. We sat down to eat, and Marcus kept up a steady stream of commentary. About the news, about his work, about a trip he and Sarah were planning to take. Normal conversation, except for the way his eyes kept drifting back to my uniform. Like it was bothering him somehow, this visible reminder of what I did for a living. So, he said, cutting into his chicken. What exactly happens at these briefings of yours? Depends on the briefing, I said. Come on, you can give us the general idea. Unless it's classified. He made air quotes around the word classified, smiling as he did it. Marcus, Sarah warned, but she was still smiling. What? I'm genuinely curious. I mean, I sit in meetings all day too, but somehow I doubt yours involve PowerPoint presentations about quarterly earnings. Dad laughed. Probably more interesting than your meetings, I bet. Are they, though? Marcus leaned forward, warming to his theme. Because from the outside, it seems like a lot of standing around, waiting for someone higher up to tell you what to think. The table went quiet. Not completely silent, but that kind of quiet where everyone's suddenly very focused on their food. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, the sound of Sarah's fork against her plate. That's not really how it works, I said. No? How does it work then? I looked around the table. Mom was reaching for the wine bottle, her movements careful and deliberate. Dad was cutting his chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. Sarah was finally looking up from her plate, but her expression was unreadable. It's complicated, I said. Marcus laughed. Everything's complicated when you don't want to explain it. I'm not trying to be evasive, aren't you? He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. Look, I get it. You can't talk about everything you do. But surely you can give us some insight into what it's like to spend your whole career waiting for permission to think. The words hit like a slap. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Like he'd been saving this up, waiting for the right moment to deliver it. And the worst part was the way he looked around the table afterward, like he expected everyone to laugh. Nobody laughed. That's enough, Dad said quietly. But Marcus wasn't finished. I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just saying that some of us had to learn to think for ourselves. To take risks, to make decisions without someone holding our hand. And some of us, he gestured at my uniform. Well, some of us chose a different path. Marcus. Sarah's voice was sharp now. What? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. The world needs followers. Someone has to take orders, right? Someone has to do what they're told without asking too many questions. He took a sip of his beer, watching me over the rim of the glass. But let's not pretend it's the same thing as real leadership. I set down my fork. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. You know what? Marcus continued, his voice getting louder. I think some people are just more comfortable being told what to do. It's easier than having to figure things out for yourself. It's safer. You don't have to worry about making mistakes because someone else is always there to make the hard decisions for you. Stop, Sarah said. But he was on a roll now, his voice carrying that particular tone people get when they think they're being brutally honest. And that's fine. Really. Society needs people like that. People who are content to follow orders, to never push back, to never question authority. People who, he looked directly at me, and I saw something ugly in his expression. People who'll never be anything more than what someone else tells them to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clock seemed to have stopped ticking. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. Waiting for me to defend myself, to push back, to prove him wrong. Instead, I picked up my knife and cut a piece of steak. Chewed slowly. Swallowed. Pass the salt, I said. Marcus blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of reaction. He'd been expecting a fight, an emotional response he could dismiss as typical military rigidity or wounded pride. But I just kept eating, as if he hadn't spoken at all. The conversation eventually resumed, stilted and awkward, but it resumed. Mom asked about Sarah's job. Dad mentioned something about the weather. Marcus tried a few more jabs, but they fell flat without the reaction he'd been looking for. I finished my dinner, complimented Mom on the meal, and excused myself. But as I was putting on my coat, I heard Marcus say to Sarah, "She's really sensitive about this stuff, isn't she?" Driving home that night, I replayed the whole scene. The look on my parents' faces. Sarah's obvious discomfort. The satisfaction in Marcus's voice when he delivered his final verdict. But mostly, I thought about that moment when he said I'd never be anything. The casual cruelty of it, delivered in front of my family like it was an established fact. He was wrong, of course. He was wrong about everything. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. That moment carried weight because of what came before. I wasn't the child anyone expected to join the military. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who cleaned up messes without being asked. When Sarah got in trouble at school, I was the one who helped her with her makeup work. When Dad hurt his back and couldn't maintain the yard, I learned how to use the mower and edger. When Mom went back to school for her nursing degree, I made dinner and helped with homework and made sure everyone had clean clothes. Nobody ever called it leadership. They called it being helpful, being mature for my age, being the good daughter who didn't cause problems. But even then, I understood that responsibility meant making decisions, taking action, ensuring that things got done right. It meant being someone others could count on, especially when no one was watching. College was supposed to change everything. I was going to study business, maybe follow some traditional path that would make my parents proud and provide financial security. But halfway through my sophomore year, I realized I was sleepwalking through my classes. Marketing principles and accounting fundamentals felt like abstract concepts that had no connection to anything I cared about. I was getting good grades, but I felt empty. The ROTC program changed that. Not immediately at first, it was just another class, something to fill an elective requirement. But gradually, I found myself looking forward to those early morning sessions. The physical challenges, yes, but more than that. The way problems had to be solved under pressure. The way leadership wasn't theoretical, but practical, immediate, necessary. My family didn't understand at first. Dad worried about the dangers. Mom couldn't figure out why I'd want to give up control over my life. Sarah thought I was going through some kind of phase, rebelling against the expectations that had always defined me. They kept waiting for me to come to my senses, to choose something safer and more predictable. But service gave me something I hadn't found anywhere else, a sense of purpose that went beyond myself. Every decision mattered. Every responsibility had real consequences. The leadership they taught wasn't about charisma or inspiration. It was about confidence, integrity, and the willingness to be accountable for outcomes. It was about being the person others could trust to make the right call when everything was falling apart. My first deployment proved that. We were in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, and I was a second lieutenant trying to figure out how to earn the respect of soldiers who'd been doing this longer than I'd been out of college. The platoon sergeant was a career NCO named Rodriguez who'd been deployed 4 times and had very little patience for inexperienced officers who thought they knew everything. 3 weeks in, we lost contact with a patrol during a routine mission. Radio silence for 6 hours, no response to calls, no visual contact. The company commander was off base, and the executive officer was dealing with a medical emergency. That left me as the senior officer, responsible for making the call about whether to send a search party or wait for the patrol to make contact. Rodriguez and I stood in the operations center, staring at the map, weighing options. Send another patrol, and we risked losing more people if this was an ambush. Wait it out, and we might be abandoning soldiers who needed help. "What's your gut tell you, Lieutenant?" Rodriguez asked. I looked at the map, at the terrain, at the timeline. Something felt wrong about the silence. These were experienced soldiers led by a staff sergeant I trusted completely. They wouldn't go dark unless something had happened. "We go find them," I said. Rodriguez nodded. "I'll get the team ready." We found them 2 clicks south of their last known position, pinned down by sniper fire in a compound they'd been clearing. 2 wounded, 1 seriously. If we'd waited another hour, the soldier with the abdominal wound might not have made it. Afterward, Rodriguez found me in the mess tent. "Good call today, ma'am." It was the first time he'd used my rank without irony. The first time I felt like I'd earned it. That's what Marcus couldn't understand. Military leadership wasn't about following orders blindly. It was about being trusted with lives, with missions, with responsibilities that mattered. It was about making decisions when failure meant people didn't come home. It was about earning respect through competence, not demanding it through hierarchy. Every promotion after that built on that foundation. Each new role brought greater responsibility, harder decisions, more complex challenges. Leading a platoon taught me about direct leadership, how to motivate, how to develop subordinates, how to maintain standards under pressure. Staff positions taught me about organizational leadership, how to coordinate between units, how to plan complex operations, how to balance competing priorities. But it was the quiet moments that shaped me most. The late-night conversations with soldiers dealing with family problems back home. The memorial services for those who didn't make it back. The decisions that kept people alive and the ones that haunted me when they didn't. The gradual understanding that leadership wasn't about being the smartest or the strongest, it was about being the person others could trust to make the hard choices when everything was on the line. By the time I made captain, I was leading a company of 200 soldiers. By major, well, that was still pending, but the responsibilities kept growing. Each level demanded more, expected more, trusted me with more. The uniform Marcus mocked represented years of proving myself, of earning the right to wear those insignia, of being held accountable for outcomes that mattered. Service had given me something I'd been searching for without knowing it, the chance to be part of something larger than myself. Not because I couldn't think independently, but because I'd chosen to use that independence in service of something that mattered. Every soldier who served under me, every mission we completed successfully, every problem we solved together, that was leadership. Real leadership. The kind that couldn't be taught in business school or learned in corporate boardrooms. Marcus saw the uniform and assumed it represented conformity, submission, the absence of independent thought. He couldn't imagine choosing to subsume your ego to a greater purpose. He couldn't understand that real strength sometimes meant taking orders, that wisdom sometimes meant trusting the judgment of those with more experience, that leadership sometimes meant following. That dinner insult wasn't just about my career, it was about everything I'd built, everything I'd chosen, everything I'd sacrificed to become the person I was. It was about the decision to serve others instead of serving myself. It was about choosing meaning over money, purpose over prestige, responsibility over recognition. He looked at me and saw someone who'd never be anything. I looked at myself and saw someone who'd already become everything I'd hoped to be. Driving home that night, I replayed it. Not just Marcus's words, but everything that led up to them. The look on my parents' faces when he called me a follower. Sarah's uncomfortable silence. The way he leaned back in his chair afterward, satisfied with his performance. The casual cruelty of someone who'd never risked anything meaningful, passing judgment on someone who'd dedicated her life to service. But what bothered me most wasn't the insult itself, it was the context. This was my family's dinner table. These were people who were supposed to know me, to understand what I'd accomplished, to support the choices I'd made. Instead, I'd sat there in my dress uniform, representing everything I'd worked for, and listened to someone dismiss it all as worthless. I thought about calling Sarah when I got home. Not to complain about Marcus, but to talk through what had happened. We'd always been close, despite our different paths. She was the one who'd helped me practice for my ROTC interviews, who'd sent care packages during my first deployment, who'd celebrated every promotion like it was her own achievement. She knew what my career meant to me. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she'd stayed silent during Marcus's monologue. Or the way she'd defended his earlier comments as jokes. Or the simple fact that she was planning to marry this man, to build a life with someone who saw me as less than nothing. Instead, I sat in my living room, still in uniform, and thought about the promotion board results. They'd been finalized 2 weeks ago, but the ceremony wasn't until Friday. 3 days away. I was one of 12 officers being promoted to major, a significant milestone, representing years of service and proven leadership. The kind of achievement that should have mattered to my family. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marcus was lecturing me about never amounting to anything, the Army had already decided I was worth promoting to field grade officer. While he was explaining my limitations to my parents, my personnel file was being reviewed by colonels who determined I was ready for greater responsibility. The disconnect was almost funny. Almost. I wondered if I should tell my family about the promotion. Part of me wanted to call Sarah right then, to share the news and maybe help her understand that Marcus's assessment was not only cruel, but factually wrong. But another part of me, the part that was still stinging from the dinner conversation, wanted to let the ceremony speak for itself. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Sorry about tonight. Marcus doesn't understand military life. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. It was the opposite of fine. This wasn't about military life, it was about respect. About recognizing that different paths could have equal value. About understanding that serving others was a choice worthy of admiration, not condescension. Another text, this one from Sarah. Are you okay? I know Marcus can be intense sometimes. Intense. That was one way to put it. Another way might be cruel, dismissive, deliberately hurtful. But Sarah was trying to navigate between her fiancé and her sister, and I could see the impossible position she was in. I'm fine, I texted back. Just tired. I'll talk to him, she replied. Don't. I typed the response quickly, then paused before sending it. Did I want her to talk to him? Did I want her to explain why his comments were inappropriate, why he needed to show more respect? Or would that just make everything more awkward, more tense, more complicated? I sent it anyway. Sarah needed to figure out her own relationship. I couldn't ask her to fight my battles, especially when those battles were with the man she was planning to marry. The next few days passed quietly. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed personnel files, prepared for the ceremony. Normal military routine, comforting in its predictability. My soldiers didn't know about the promotion yet. That would be announced at the ceremony. But there was something satisfying about going through the familiar motions, doing the job I'd been trained to do, serving with people who understood the value of service. Wednesday evening, Sarah called. I talked to Marcus, she said without preamble. I told you not to. I know. But I had to. What he said wasn't okay. There was something different in her voice. Strained, maybe. Defensive. What did he say? A long pause. He said he was just trying to be honest. That someone needed to tell you the truth about your limitations. The casual brutality of it took my breath away. Not content with humiliating me at dinner, he was now framing it as a favor. Someone needed to tell me the truth. Someone needed to explain my own limitations to me. Sarah, I know. I know it's not okay. But he thinks you're stuck. That you've chosen a path that doesn't let you grow, doesn't let you be independent. He thinks he's helping. The word helping hung in the air between us. As if destroying someone's confidence at a family dinner was an act of kindness. As if dismissing years of service and sacrifice was therapeutic intervention. Does he know about the promotion? I asked. Another pause. What promotion? So I told her. About the board results, about the ceremony, about the rank I'd earned through years of proving myself worthy of greater responsibility. I told her about the soldiers I'd led, the missions I'd completed, the trust the army had placed in me. I told her about the things Marcus couldn't see because he didn't want to see them. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Why didn't you tell us? She finally asked. Because I wanted it to speak for itself. You wanted to prove him wrong. I wanted to let the facts be the facts. Another long silence. Then, will you invite us to the ceremony? I thought about it. The image of Marcus sitting in that auditorium, watching me receive my oak leaves, listening to my accomplishments read aloud. The look on his face when he realized how wrong he'd been. The satisfaction of vindication. But that wasn't why I'd served. That wasn't why I'd worked for this promotion. I hadn't spent years earning the respect of my peers and superiors just to prove a point to my sister's condescending fiancé. Of course, I said. It's Friday at 1400 hours. We'll be there, Sarah said. All of us. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Was this revenge? Justice? Or just the natural consequence of Marcus's inability to recognize worth when he saw it? Maybe it didn't matter. Friday would come regardless. The ceremony would happen whether my family attended or not. My promotion was already decided, already earned, already deserved. Marcus's opinion couldn't change any of that. But it might change how he saw me. And maybe that was worth something after all. I made a choice. I wouldn't defend myself with words. I'd let my record speak. The promotion board had already reviewed my file, assessed my performance, weighed my potential. The ceremony was 3 days away, and I'd told no one in my family except Sarah, and that was only after her phone call. It wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about truth. about letting reality assert itself without explanation or justification. Marcus had made his judgment based on assumptions and prejudice. The Army had made theirs based on 14 years of documented performance, leadership evaluations, and proven competence under pressure. I knew which assessment carried more weight. Thursday morning brought the usual pre-ceremony preparations. Final administrative checks, uniform inspections, coordination with the protocol office. I'd been through promotion ceremonies before, both as a participant and as an attendee. The ritual was familiar: formal atmosphere, proud families, the weight of tradition and accomplishment. But this one felt different. More personal. More significant. My company commander stopped by my office around noon. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was a career officer, 22 years in the Army, someone whose respect I'd worked hard to earn. She'd been my raider for the past 18 months, responsible for the evaluation that had helped secure my promotion. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Not really, ma'am. Looking forward to it." "Good. You've earned this, Dixon." The board was unanimous. That doesn't happen often. Unanimous. I hadn't known that detail. It meant that every senior officer who'd reviewed my file had agreed I was ready for Major. Not just qualified, but ready. That distinction mattered in an organization where standards were everything. "I appreciate the confidence, ma'am." "It's not confidence. It's recognition of performance." She leaned forward slightly. "You know what set your package apart? It wasn't just your technical competence, though that's outstanding. It wasn't just your leadership ability, though you've proven that repeatedly. It was your judgment. The way you handle complex situations without clear guidance. The way you balance competing priorities and still accomplish the mission." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "That's what makes a good field-grade officer. The ability to operate independently while serving something larger than yourself. Some people never learn that balance." After she left, I thought about that phrase, operating independently while serving something larger than yourself. It was exactly the opposite of what Marcus had accused me of. He saw following orders and assumed I couldn't think for myself. The Army saw my ability to think for myself and trusted me with greater authority to use that judgment in service of the mission. That evening, Sarah called again. "We'll be there tomorrow," she said. "Mom's excited. Dad too. They're proud of you, you know." "I know. Marcus is. Well, he's coming." "I think he feels bad about what he said." "I doubted that, but I didn't say so. It'll be nice to have family there." "Are you sure you're not doing this just to prove him wrong?" The question bothered me more than it should have. Was that what this was? Some elaborate setup designed to humiliate Marcus in front of my family? The thought made me uncomfortable. I'd never used my career as a weapon before. I'd never needed to. "I'm doing this because I earned it," I said. "The timing is just coincidence." "Okay. I believe you." She paused. "But I hope he learns something from this. About you. About what you do. People learn what they're ready to learn." "That's very zen of you. That's very military of me. You can't force people to understand something they don't want to understand." Friday morning arrived clear and cold. I spent extra time on my uniform, making sure every detail was perfect. Shoes polished to mirror brightness. Ribbons precisely aligned. Brass gleaming. The dress blue uniform was designed to project authority, competence, professionalism. Today, it felt like armor. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the post auditorium. I arrived an hour early for final preparations and found the other promotes already there, going through the same ritual of nervous energy and quiet anticipation. Captains becoming majors, lieutenants becoming captains, sergeants becoming staff sergeants. All of us moving up in the hierarchy, taking on greater responsibility, accepting greater trust. The families began arriving around 1:30. I watched from the wings as parents and spouses and children filled the seats, everyone dressed up for the occasion, cameras ready to capture the moment. My family arrived 15 minutes before the ceremony began. Mom in her blue dress, Dad in his good suit, Sarah looking nervous. And Marcus, in what appeared to be an expensive gray suit, checking his phone. The commanding general called the ceremony to order at exactly 1400 hours. The usual opening remarks about service and sacrifice, and the continuing need for strong leadership in an uncertain world. Then the individual promotions began, starting with the enlisted soldiers and working up through the officer ranks. Each promotion followed the same format. The general would call the name, the individual would march forward, the citation would be read aloud, the new rank would be pinned on, the oath administered. Handshakes, applause, photographs. The rhythm of military ceremony, precise and dignified. When they reached the major promotions, my heart rate increased slightly. Not from nervousness, I'd been through this before, but from anticipation. From the knowledge that this moment represented something significant, both professionally and personally. Captain L'Oreal, Dixon. I marched forward, stopped at attention in front of the general. Behind him, I could see my family in the third row. Mom was already crying. Dad was sitting straighter than usual. Sarah was focused intently on the proceedings. Marcus was paying attention. Really paying attention, maybe for the first time since I'd known him. The general's aide began reading my citation for exceptionally meritorious service as company commander, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, demonstrated outstanding leadership during Operation Enduring Freedom. Instrumental in the successful completion of 12 complex combat missions, expert tactical knowledge and sound judgment under pressure, promoted to the rank of Major, United States Army. The words washed over me, formal and familiar. But hearing them read aloud, in front of my family, gave them new weight. This wasn't abstract military jargon. These were my accomplishments, my service record, the accumulated evidence of 14 years spent earning this moment. The general pinned the gold oak leaves on my collar, replacing the silver bars I'd worn as a captain. The weight was barely noticeable, but the significance was enormous. Field Grade Officer. Staff positions. Greater responsibility. Command at battalion level and above. Congratulations, Major Dixon. Thank you, sir. The handshake was firm, professional. But there was something in the general's eyes, recognition, respect, acknowledgement of a job well done. This wasn't ceremony for its own sake. This was the Army's way of saying, we trust you with more. As I returned to my position, the applause filled the auditorium. I caught a glimpse of my family. Mom was beaming through her tears. Dad was clapping with obvious pride. Sarah was smiling widely, genuinely happy for me. And Marcus was staring. Not clapping, not smiling, just staring with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or confusion. The look of someone whose certainties had just been challenged by reality. The ceremony concluded with the traditional remarks about responsibility and service, and the continuing mission ahead. But I was barely listening. I was thinking about that moment when the citation was read, when my family heard exactly what I'd accomplished, exactly what the Army thought I was worth. Afterward, during the reception, my family surrounded me with congratulations and photographs. Mom kept touching the new oak leaves on my collar. Dad wanted to know about my next assignment. Sarah was genuinely excited, asking questions about what major meant, what kind of responsibilities I'd have. Marcus hung back, quieter than usual. When he finally approached, his handshake was different. Firmer. More respectful. Congratulations, he said. That was impressive. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not quite humility, but uncertainty. The confident dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. Or at least the recognition that he'd been wrong. Thank you, I said simply. I didn't realize. I mean, the things they said about your service. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words. I may have misjudged some things. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Coming from Marcus, it was probably the closest thing to admitting error I'd ever get. I could have pushed for more, could have reminded him of his dinner comments, could have made him squirm. But looking at his face, genuinely uncomfortable for the first time since I'd known him, I felt no need for further vindication. People see things differently, I said. That's normal. He nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't going to make this harder for him. Well, congratulations again, Major. He used my new rank carefully, like he was testing how it sounded. The reception continued for another hour, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Marcus spoke less, listened more, asked actual questions instead of making pronouncements. When someone mentioned my deployment experience, he didn't dismiss it as following orders. He asked what it had been like, what I'd learned, how it had shaped my perspective. Driving home that evening, I thought about what had changed. Not just Marcus's attitude, but my own feelings about the whole situation. 3 days ago, his comments had stung because they carried the weight of family dynamics, of having to justify myself to people who should have known better. Tonight, they seemed smaller somehow. Less significant. The truth was, I didn't need Marcus's approval. I never had. The army had given me something more valuable, the opportunity to prove myself through action, to earn respect through performance, to build a career based on competence rather than politics. The promotion ceremony hadn't been about showing Marcus up, it had been about receiving recognition I'd already earned. But it had also revealed something important about the power of assumptions. Marcus had looked at my uniform and seen limitation. The army looked at my record and saw potential. The difference wasn't in what I'd accomplished, it was in what the observer was prepared to see. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that Marcus was wrong about military service, but that he was wrong about me. He'd made the mistake of confusing the uniform with the person wearing it, of assuming that choosing to serve others meant being incapable of independent thought. The ceremony had forced him to confront the gap between his assumptions and reality. When Sarah called later that night, she sounded different. Lighter, somehow. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I was always proud of you, but today, hearing all those things they said about what you've done, I didn't realize. You never asked." "I know. I should have. I should have understood better." She paused. Marcus feels terrible about what he said. He shouldn't. He was working with incomplete information. That's generous of you. It's honest. We all make judgments based on what we think we know. Sometimes we're wrong. He wants to take you to dinner. To apologize properly. I thought about it. Dinner with Marcus, where he could perform his contrition, and I could graciously accept his apology. Where we could pretend the last few months hadn't happened, where everyone could feel better about themselves. It would be the polite thing to do, the family-friendly thing to do. "Maybe another time," I said. "I'm pretty busy with the transition to my new position." "Okay, but he really is sorry." "I believe you." And I did believe her. Marcus was probably sorry. Sorry he'd been wrong. Sorry he'd been called out on it. Sorry the situation had become awkward. But his sorrow was about his own discomfort, not about the harm his words had caused. There was a difference. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, still in my dress uniform, and looked at the new oak leaves on my collar. Major. Field Grade Officer. 14 years of service crystallized into 2 small pieces of metal. It seemed inadequate somehow, until I remembered what those leaves represented. Not just rank, but responsibility. Not just recognition, but trust. Monday would bring new challenges, new expectations, new opportunities to prove myself worthy of that trust. There would be soldiers to lead, missions to accomplish, problems to solve. The daily work of service, unglamorous and essential, far removed from family dinners and social dynamics. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not because I'd proven Marcus wrong, that had never been the goal, but because I'd received recognition for work that mattered, from people whose judgment I respected, in service of something larger than myself. That was enough. That was everything. At the ceremony, the hall was filled with officers, families, and staff. The post-auditorium held 300 people, and it was nearly full. Gold and blue bunting draped the stage where the commanding general would preside. The flags of the United States, the Army, and our installations stood at attention behind the podium. Everything polished, everything perfect, everything designed to honor the significance of the moment. My family sat together in the 3rd row, close enough that I could see their faces from the wings where the promotes waited. Mom kept adjusting her purse strap, nervous energy manifesting in small movements. Dad sat with military straightness, his Navy background showing in his posture. Sarah was taking pictures with her phone, documenting everything. And Marcus was there beside her, checking his watch occasionally, but present. The ceremony began precisely at 1400 hours. The commanding general took the podium, a colonel with 30 years of service and 3 combat deployments. His remarks were brief but meaningful, touching on the responsibility of rank, the privilege of service, the trust being placed in each promotee. Today we recognize not just individual achievement, but institutional confidence, he said. Each promotion represents the Army's judgment that these officers and soldiers are ready for greater responsibility, greater trust, greater service to our nation and our soldiers. The individual promotions began with the enlisted personnel. Staff sergeants becoming sergeants first class, sergeants becoming staff sergeants. Each name called with precision, each citation read with the gravity it deserved. These weren't just career milestones, they were acknowledgments of proven leadership, demonstrated competence, earned trust. Then came the officer promotions. Second lieutenants becoming first lieutenants becoming captains. I watched each one, remembering my own journey through those ranks, the lessons learned at each level, the gradual understanding of what leadership really meant. Finally, the major promotions. There were 4 of us that day, each with different backgrounds and specialties, but all deemed ready for field-grade responsibility. The first 3 went smoothly, each officer marching forward with confidence, receiving their oak leaves with dignity, taking the oath with solemnity. Then, Captain L'Oreal, Dixon. I stepped forward, my movements automatic from years of drill and ceremony. Left foot first, arms swinging naturally, eyes focused straight ahead. The distance from the wings to the center of the stage felt longer than usual, but I reached my position and executed a perfect halt, facing the general at attention. Behind him, I could see my family clearly now. Mom had tears in her eyes already. Dad was beaming with unmistakable pride. Sarah was recording everything, wanting to capture this moment. And Marcus was watching intently, his earlier skepticism replaced by what looked like genuine attention. The general's aide stepped forward with my citation, Captain L'Oreal. Dixon is promoted to the rank of Major, United States Army. During her service as company commander, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, Major Dixon demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical acumen. She successfully led 200 soldiers through 12 months of combat operations in Afghanistan, completing all assigned missions without loss of life under her command. The words carried across the auditorium, formal and precise. But hearing them aloud gave them new weight. These weren't abstract accomplishments, these were real missions, real soldiers, real responsibilities I'd carried. Major Dixon's innovative approaches to counterinsurgency operations resulted in a 40% reduction in hostile activity within her area of responsibility. Her mentorship of junior officers and non-commissioned officers set the standard for professional development throughout the brigade. Her sound judgment under pressure and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment exemplify the finest traditions of the United States Army. The citation continued, detailing specific achievements, leadership positions, educational accomplishments. But I was thinking about the soldiers it didn't mention by name. Rodriguez, my first platoon sergeant, who'd taught me that respect was earned through competence. Lieutenant Thompson, fresh from West Point, who'd looked to me for guidance during his first combat mission. Sergeant First Class Williams, who'd kept our supply lines running through impossible conditions. All of them were part of this promotion, part of the record that had brought me to this moment. Leadership wasn't a solo performance, it was a collaborative effort, built on the trust and competence of countless soldiers who'd served with distinction. Major Dixon's performance of duty reflects great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. The general stepped forward with the oak leaves. The removal of my captain's bars and replacement with major's leaves took less than 30 seconds, but it felt ceremonial, weighty, significant. These small pieces of metal represented years of proving myself, of earning the trust of superiors and subordinates alike. Congratulations, Major Dixon. Thank you, sir. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. This wasn't perfunctory ceremony. This was one professional acknowledging another's achievement. Behind his eyes, I saw the recognition that came from shared experience, from understanding what this promotion really meant. The oath came next. I, Lori Dixon, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The familiar words, spoken at every promotion, every commissioning, every re-enlistment. But they never felt routine. They were a reminder of purpose, of commitment, of the reason we served. As I spoke the final words, "So help me God," the auditorium erupted in applause. Not polite ceremonial clapping, but genuine appreciation. My fellow officers, the families in attendance, the soldiers who understood what this moment represented. The sound filled the space, overwhelming and affirming. I caught another glimpse of my family during the applause. Mom was crying openly now, proud and emotional. Dad was clapping with enthusiasm, his own military service helping him appreciate the significance. Sarah was beaming, genuinely happy for me in a way that transcended any family complications. And Marcus had dropped his wine glass. It happened during the loudest part of the applause, when the general was shaking my hand and the photographer was capturing the moment. Marcus had been holding a plastic cup of wine. The reception had started early for families, and sometime during the citation reading, his grip had loosened. The cup hit the floor with a small plastic sound that was lost in the applause, its contents spreading across the auditorium carpet. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the dismissive confidence of our family dinners, not the casual superiority he usually wore like cologne. This was something closer to shock. The realization that everything he'd assumed about me, everything he'd believed about my capabilities and limitations, had been completely wrong. Sarah noticed the spilled wine and nudged him, offering napkins from her purse. But Marcus barely responded, still focused on the stage where I was completing the ceremony. His face had gone pale, and there was something in his eyes that might have been shame. The ceremony concluded with the traditional remarks about continued service and greater responsibility. But I was thinking about that moment when Marcus dropped his glass, when the reality of my accomplishments had finally penetrated his assumptions. Not because I'd set out to shock him, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud, in front of everyone, by people whose judgment mattered. During the reception afterward, the congratulations came from all directions. Fellow officers who'd served with me, senior leaders who'd mentored me, junior officers who looked to me for guidance. Each handshake, each word of congratulations, reinforced the significance of what had just happened. My family approached together, Mom leading the way with tears still fresh on her cheeks. "I'm so proud of you," she said, embracing me carefully to avoid disrupting my uniform. "I had no idea, all those things they said about what you've done." "You never asked," I said gently. "I should have. We all should have." Dad's congratulations were quieter but no less meaningful. "Major Dixon," he said, testing out my new rank. "Has a nice ring to it." Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. "That was incredible. I recorded the whole thing. Wait until you hear what they said about your combat leadership." She was talking quickly, excited in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. Marcus approached last, his earlier confidence completely absent. The wine stain on his shirt was barely visible, but I noticed it anyway. When he extended his hand, his grip was different, respectful, uncertain, perhaps even apologetic. "Congratulations, Major," he said. The title came awkwardly, like he was still processing what it meant. I had no idea about your record." "Most people don't," I said simply. "The things they said about Afghanistan, about your soldiers." He seemed to be struggling with something. "I misjudged you." "Completely." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. From Marcus, it was probably the closest thing to admitting error I'd ever receive. I could have pressed for more, could have reminded him of his dinner comments, could have made him explicitly confront his assumptions. Instead, I just nodded. People see what they expect to see. The reception continued around us, but something fundamental had shifted. Not just in Marcus's understanding of me, but in the entire dynamic of our relationship. The power balance had changed, permanently and publicly. He could never again dismiss my career as meaningless, never again lecture me about real leadership versus military following. The truth had been spoken, loudly and clearly, by people whose judgment carried weight. The U.S. Army had rendered its verdict on my worth, my capabilities, my potential. And that verdict trumped any civilian's amateur assessment of military service. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, I found myself thinking about the broader implications. This wasn't just about Marcus being wrong, it was about the assumptions people made about military service, about the gap between perception and reality, about the difference between leadership and authority. Marcus had looked at my uniform and seen conformity. The Army looked at my record and saw innovation. He'd seen limitation, they'd seen potential. The difference wasn't in what I'd accomplished, but in what the observer was prepared to recognize as valuable. Tonight, for the first time since I'd known him, Marcus had been forced to see me as the Army saw me, as a leader worthy of trust, responsibility, and respect. The oak leaves on my collar weren't just symbols of rank, they were proof of earned authority, demonstrated competence, validated judgment. It was a lesson he wouldn't forget. And neither would I. Afterward, he tried to joke about it. The reception was winding down. Most families had taken their photographs and offered their congratulations, but Marcus lingered near the refreshment table like he was working up courage for something. When he finally approached me, his smile looked forced, uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. "Didn't know you had that kind of pull," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the stage where the ceremony had taken place. The words came out wrong somehow, like he'd rehearsed them but lost confidence in the delivery. I looked at him for a moment, trying to understand what he meant. Pull? As if my promotion had been the result of connections rather than performance? As if 14 years of service and a unanimous promotion board recommendation were somehow equivalent to office politics? "It's not about pull," I said simply. Right. Of course. He took a sip from his replacement wine glass, his movements nervous. "I just meant, I didn't realize you were so accomplished." The word accomplished hung between us, loaded with implications. He'd spent months making it clear that he saw no accomplishment in my career, no achievement worth recognizing. Now, faced with evidence he couldn't dismiss or reinterpret, he was trying to find a way to acknowledge reality without admitting how wrong he'd been. Sarah appeared beside us, still glowing from the ceremony. Wasn't that amazing? I had no idea military promotions were so formal, so prestigious. "Very impressive," Marcus agreed, but his eyes were on me, still processing what he'd witnessed. "All those combat missions, all those soldiers under your command. That's serious responsibility." "It is," I said. "I guess I never really understood what you do. What you've done." He was working hard to sound casual, but there was something desperate in his voice. A need to reset, to establish a new baseline for our interactions. "Maybe you could tell me more about it sometime. About Afghanistan, about your soldiers." The request surprised me. For months, Marcus had shown zero interest in my actual experiences, preferring his assumptions about military limitations. Now he wanted details, specifics, the kind of information that might help him understand how thoroughly he'd misjudged me. "Maybe," I said. Mom joined our small group, still emotional from the ceremony. "I keep thinking about what that general said, about you saving lives, about bringing everyone home safely. My daughter, responsible for 200 soldiers." She shook her head in amazement. "I'm sorry we never asked you about this before. Most families don't understand military service," I said. "It's not unusual. But we should have tried harder," Dad added, approaching with his empty coffee cup. "We should have known what you were accomplishing over there." Marcus was quiet during this exchange, listening to my parents process their new understanding of my career. I could see him connecting dots, realizing that their ignorance had been his ignorance too. That his dismissive comments hadn't just insulted me, they'd revealed his own failure to understand something important about someone he claimed to know. The conversation eventually moved to logistics. When would I take on my new duties? What did the promotion mean for my next assignment? Whether I'd stay at this base or move to a new position. Normal family questions, the kind that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. But Marcus remained subdued, contributing little to the discussion. When Sarah mentioned our upcoming family vacation, he just nodded. When Dad asked about my thoughts on current military operations, Marcus listened without commentary. The confident authority he usually projected had evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like deference. As the reception hall emptied and we prepared to leave, Marcus made one final attempt at conversation. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, while Sarah was saying goodbye to some of the other families. "What I said at dinner about you never being anything, that was completely out of line." I studied his face, looking for sincerity behind the words. His discomfort seemed genuine, but I wasn't sure if he was apologizing for being wrong or for being caught being wrong. "You didn't have complete information," I said. "That's no excuse." I should have. I should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. People do that sometimes. "Yeah, but..." He struggled for a moment, then seemed to give up on finding the right words. "Anyway, I'm sorry. And congratulations again, Major." He used my new rank carefully, like he was still getting used to the sound of it. The apology felt adequate without being transformative. Marcus was acknowledging his error, which was more than I'd expected. But there was something performative about it too, as if he was checking a box rather than genuinely grappling with what his assumptions had revealed about his character. "Thank you," I said. Sarah returned from her goodbyes, linking her arm through Marcus's with obvious affection. "Ready to go? I want to stop for dinner on the way home. We need to celebrate." As we walked toward the parking lot together, the dynamic felt different. Subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus walked slightly behind rather than leading the group. His comments were questions rather than pronouncements. When Sarah asked about my new responsibilities, he listened without interrupting or offering his own interpretations. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. He could never again lecture me about real leadership versus military conformity. He could never again dismiss my career as following orders without independent thought. The promotion ceremony had established facts he couldn't argue with or reinterpret. Driving home alone after dinner, I reflected on what had changed. Not just Marcus's attitude, but my own relationship to his opinion. 3 days ago, his comments at dinner had stung because they carried the weight of family judgment. Tonight, his apology felt almost irrelevant. The truth was, I'd never needed his approval. The Army had given me something more valuable: objective measures of performance, clear standards for advancement, recognition based on results rather than personalities. My worth wasn't determined by family dynamics or social opinions. It was established through service, proven through action, validated by peers and superiors who understood what excellence looked like. Marcus's reversal was satisfying, but it wasn't necessary. I'd already received the recognition that mattered from the people whose judgment I respected. His newfound respect was a pleasant bonus, not a requirement for my self-worth. When Sarah called later that evening, she sounded happier than she'd been in months. "Thank you for inviting us today," she said. "I feel like I understand you better now. Like I know my sister again. I'm the same person I've always been." "I know. But now I know what that means." She paused. "Marcus feels terrible about what he said. Really terrible. He apologized. It's fine. Is it? I mean, are things okay between you two now?" I thought about how to answer that. Were things okay? Marcus had acknowledged his error and shown appropriate respect for my accomplishments. He'd stopped making condescending comments about my career. He'd asked genuine questions about my experiences. By most measures, things were better than they'd been in months. But something fundamental had shifted that couldn't be undone. I'd seen his capacity for casual cruelty, his need to diminish others to elevate himself, his willingness to make sweeping judgments based on prejudice rather than facts. The apology didn't erase those character traits, it just meant he'd learned to be more careful about displaying them. "Things are fine," I said. "We understand each other better now." Good. I was worried this might, I don't know, create permanent problems. No permanent problems. After we hung up, I sat in my living room still wearing my dress uniform, looking at the oak leaves on my collar. The ceremony felt like it had happened days ago rather than hours. But the weight of the moment remained, the satisfaction of earning recognition through merit rather than politics. Marcus would probably be more respectful going forward. He might even become genuinely interested in understanding military service. But the real victory wasn't changing his mind, it was realizing I didn't need to. I had my own measures of success, my own community of respect, my own sense of purpose that existed independently of his approval. That was the lesson I'd carry forward, not that proving people wrong was satisfying, but that their opinions mattered less than I'd thought. The uniform I wore represented something larger than family dynamics or social perceptions. It represented commitment, confidence, service to something beyond myself. And that was enough. Looking back, I don't remember the sting of that dinner as much as the sound of the applause that day. The room stood for me, not for his approval, not for family validation, but for what I had earned. Colonel Hayes was right about the balance between independence and service, about operating with judgment while serving something larger than yourself. That's what the applause recognized. 6 months later, Marcus and I had settled into a new equilibrium. He asked thoughtful questions about military operations when they appeared in the news. He stopped making assumptions about my capabilities or my career trajectory. He never again suggested that following orders was the same thing as lacking independent thought. The shift was subtle but permanent, like a recalibration of his entire understanding of what I represented. Sarah seemed relieved by the change. She'd been walking a tightrope between her fiancé and her sister for months, trying to maintain relationships that seemed fundamentally incompatible. The promotion ceremony had resolved that tension by establishing facts that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. Now family gatherings felt normal again, without the undercurrent of condescension that had made every conversation feel like a test. But the real change was in my own perspective. I'd learned something important about the difference between seeking approval and demanding respect. Marcus's opinion had mattered to me more than it should have, not because I valued his judgment, but because I'd confused family harmony with personal validation. His dismissal had stung because I'd given him power over my self-worth that he hadn't earned and didn't deserve. The military had taught me a different model of recognition. Respect was earned through performance, measured against objective standards, validated by people with the experience to make informed judgments. My worth wasn't determined by dinner conversation or social dynamics, it was established through years of proving myself capable of increasing responsibility. That lesson extended beyond my relationship with Marcus. I stopped feeling the need to justify my career choices to anyone who couldn't understand them. I stopped explaining the value of service to people who saw only limitation. I stopped defending decisions that had already been validated by results. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd been unconsciously seeking approval from civilian family and friends who had no framework for understanding military service. I'd been translating my experiences into terms they could relate to, minimizing the unique aspects of military culture to make them more comfortable. The promotion ceremony had reminded me that translation wasn't necessary. My career spoke for itself in the language of results. My new duties as a major brought greater challenges and greater satisfaction. I was assigned to a staff position at division level, responsible for planning complex operations that involved multiple units, competing priorities, and significant resources. The work required exactly the kind of independent thinking Marcus had claimed the military suppressed, analyzing incomplete information, developing creative solutions, balancing risk against mission requirements. The soldiers I worked with understood these challenges instinctively. They didn't need explanations about the relationship between authority and autonomy, between structure and flexibility, between following orders and exercising judgment. They lived those balances every day. They knew that real leadership meant being trusted with decisions that mattered, that real competence meant performing under pressure without detailed guidance. That community of understanding became more important to me than external validation. The respect of peers who understood what excellence looked like meant more than the approval of family members who couldn't distinguish between real achievement and superficial success. I was part of something larger than myself, something with its own standards and values and measures of worth. Marcus noticed the change, though he probably couldn't articulate what was different. I stopped engaging with his need to establish intellectual dominance in conversations. I stopped feeling defensive about career choices he couldn't understand. I stopped trying to bridge the gap between his assumptions and my reality. It wasn't hostile or dismissive, it was simply acceptance of fundamental differences. Marcus needed to be the expert in every conversation, needed to find ways to position himself as the authority on everything from politics to technology to human nature. That was his insecurity to manage, not my problem to solve. The wedding, when it finally happened, was pleasant and uneventful. Marcus was a gracious groom, Sarah was a radiant bride, and family dynamics remained smooth throughout the celebration. I wore my dress uniform at Sarah's request, and several people commented on the significance of my rank, the responsibility it represented, the respect it commanded. Marcus introduced me to his friends and colleagues as Major Dixon, using my rank with what seemed like genuine pride. Not the forced acknowledgement of the promotion ceremony, but comfortable familiarity with my accomplishments. He learned to see my career as something that reflected well on the family rather than something that needed explanation or apology. During the reception, his father, a retired corporate executive, asked detailed questions about military leadership, about the differences between civilian and military management, about the challenges of leading in high-stress environments. Marcus listened to the conversation without trying to redirect it, without positioning himself as the expert on leadership dynamics. Later, Sarah thanked me for wearing my uniform. "It means a lot to Marcus that you're here like this. He's proud to have you as family." I smiled and hugged her, genuinely happy for her happiness. The uniform had become a symbol of something different than it had been 6 months earlier. Not a source of tension or misunderstanding, but simply part of who I was. Something that commanded respect without requiring explanation. Sometimes respect isn't defended in arguments or dinners. Sometimes it's announced out loud, in front of everyone, by a commander who knows exactly what you're worth. Sometimes it's built through years of proving yourself worthy of trust. Sometimes it's recognized by a room full of people who understand what excellence looks like. The sound of that applause stays with me, not because it proved Marcus wrong, but because it proved something right. It validated choices made for the right reasons, work done to the highest standards, service rendered to something larger than personal ambition. It reminded me that worth isn't determined by the loudest voice in the conversation, but by the accumulation of decisions, actions, and results over time. That's the part one carry with me. That's the legacy of that moment. Not the satisfaction of watching someone drop their glass, but the deeper satisfaction of earning recognition from people whose judgment matters. Not the vindication of proving critics wrong, but the affirmation of proving myself right. The uniform I wear represents that choice, that commitment, that daily decision to serve something larger than myself. Sometimes family understands that immediately. Sometimes it takes a ceremony for the message to come through clearly. But the choice itself doesn't depend on external understanding or approval. It depends on knowing, with absolute certainty, that the work matters, the service means something, and the respect is earned rather than given. Everything else is just noise. That's what real leadership looks like. That's what authentic achievement sounds like. That's what I learned the day a room full of people stood up and applauded not just my promotion, but everything it represented about the person I'd chosen to become. And that's how it played out. I didn't need to argue at that dinner table. My record spoke for itself. The respect came when it mattered, in front of the people who counted. What about you? Have you ever had someone doubt you, only to watch them eat their words later? How did you handle it? Did you confront them, or let your actions speak louder? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you got something out of this, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that real respect is earned.